We offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications. An overview of the Second World War. The Second World War is one of the most destructive wars in history, causing havoc and suffering in its aftermath. While the 20th century has brought a better life to some people and nations, it has also brought unprecedented suffering to many others. While human history did not have the opportunity to forget the negative effects of the First World War, which occurred at the beginning of the century, it had to experience the same damage again with the Second World War. Germany's expansionist policy and Japan's threatening policy brought the world to the brink of another war. Hitler not only changed the history of Germany, but also confronted the people of the world with a war they would not soon forget. The provisions of the peace treaties that ended the First World War greatly influenced and shaped world politics in the years after 1919. The negative effects of the peace agreements had the greatest impact on Germany. Under great economic and political pressure, Germany embarked on a new quest. It can be seen that Germany was going through a period of collapse before the war, and one of the most terrible events that prepared the collapse was the heavy conditions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919. The Treaty of Versailles came just as Germany had achieved its first democratic organization under the Weimar Constitution. The relentless reparations debt imposed by Versailles led to an avalanche of inflation. In Germany, nationalism emerged as a reaction to the Treaty of Versailles, and the Social Democrats were responsible for it. The coup against the government led by Wolfgang Kapp lasted only a few days and failed. In the aftermath, Germany was shaken by threats of dictatorship from both the right and the left. Reasons for the outbreak of the Second World War. After the failed Kapp coup, militarist movements in Germany accelerated, and in January 1919 the German Labour Party was founded in Munich. In September, Adolf Hitler, a former sergeant major and unsuccessful painter, joined the party's political committee. In 1920, the party was renamed the National Socialist German Labour Party, Nazi. After this date, it was undoubtedly Hitler and Nazi ideology that left their mark on the Second World War. The reasons that led the world to war cannot be confined to Germany alone. Italy's disappointments after the First World War, Britain's inability to maintain its pre-war policy of balance after the war, the United States' failure to join the League of Nations and its desire to stay away from Europe's problems, and the Soviet Union's distancing itself from Europe because of the revolution were among the other causes of the Second World War. Meanwhile, Britain and France made efforts to prevent the outbreak of war and pursued a policy of isolating Germany. They made the following efforts to keep the peace. The Locarno period. The Locarno period, which lasted 6 months, was a short-lived but significant era in the history of international relations. It is regarded as the golden age of peace and cooperation between the two world wars. The Dawes Plan, which was implemented during this period, was a pivotal moment in the restructuring of Germany's debt. This period brought about a relaxation of the situation in Germany. The German economy began to recover, and the value of the mark increased. Germany also made progress in international trade during this period. The Locarno Treaty was born out of France's efforts to guarantee its own security in the face of German aggression. On 16 October 1925, the Locarno-Entschließung was signed in Switzerland by France, Britain, Italy, and Germany. This was a pact of non-aggression. The Washington Naval Conference of 1922, which established limits on naval armaments, was the result of the United States' desire to contain Japanese expansionism. The countries involved in the region agreed to respect each other's interests in the Pacific. However, the conference resulted in the United States, Italy, France, and Britain agreeing to limit their naval capabilities. This agreement was significant because it marked the first time that Britain shared its maritime superiority with the United States. After this date, a conference on the limitation of naval armaments was convened again in 1930. At this conference, Japan, the USA, and the UK agreed on the limitation of smaller tonnage warships. The Briand-Kellogg Pact was signed in 1928. In 1927, French Foreign Minister Aristide Briand put forward the idea that mutual obligations should be made between France and the USA. which deemed war as illegal. U.S. Secretary of State Kellogg was clear that this obligation could only be achieved through multilateral agreements. In response, the Briand-Kellogg Pact was signed in 1928 with the participation of the USA, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Poland, Belgium, and Czechoslovakia. While these efforts were underway, the World Economic Depression, called Black Thursday, broke out. The financial distress of some European banks led to a sudden drop in stock prices on the New York Stock Exchange, which then affected the entire U.S. economy. The crisis spread to other countries wave by wave. Germany was the country most affected by the economic depression, which had the highest foreign debt. All the measures taken in Europe could not alleviate the economic depression. The depression led nations to economic nationalism and the birth of a dictator like Hitler in Germany. Hitler came to power in January 1933. There were also communists and revolutionary political movements in Germany. None of these parties had won a majority in free elections until then. On 30th of January 1933, at the suggestion of President Hindenburg, Hitler, the leader of the National Socialists, became chancellor, despite not having a majority. After taking power, Hitler disbanded the Reichstag for new elections and increased the number of seats in the elections. He then abandoned his adherence to the law and closed down all other parties. In 1934, with the death of the head of state, he took the head of state as well as the head of government. From that date, Hitler made it clear that the purpose of the Nazi movement was to establish the Nazi state and to restructure this new state. He made it clear that the German people should act together against Marxism and the Jews. Italy's transformation into a fascist state under Mussolini's leadership was a significant contributing factor to the outbreak of World War II. Germany's efforts to get rid of the heavy conditions of the Versailles Treaty were not met with the necessary reaction by England and France, creating the environment that Mussolini was looking for. Italy saw this as an opportunity to seize a territory outside Europe. Taking advantage of the clash between the soldiers of the two states in Welwel on the border of Abyssinia and Somalia, Italy attacked Abyssinia. Italy's invasion of Abyssinia opened the road to World War II. The Far East was also mobilized. Japan was concerned about the northern regions of China coming under the control of the central government and started to move northwards in 1927. But North China recognized the sovereignty of the central government. Japan took advantage of the fact that the USA was trying to alleviate the effects of the World Economic Depression, and the Soviets had not completed their military preparations in the Far East. In 1931, Japan started to occupy Manchuria. The conflict environment, which was prevented by the Washington Naval Disarmament Conference, started again. With the strengthening of Germany through Hitler, the Axis states formed around him became the important reason for the outbreak of a world war again. The three Axis states of Germany, Italy, and Japan were the driving force behind the political developments. Britain and France, once adherents to the disarmament decision of the League of Nations, were forced to form the Allied states in the face of the rapid armament of Germany and Italy. War was inevitable. The start of the war. On 1st September 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Britain and France sided with Poland. This was the start of World War II, a war that lasted for 6 years. It was a war that claimed the lives of 40 million people, left millions of people disabled, and resulted in the deaths of more than 5 million people in concentration camps and gas chambers. This was a shameful event in terms of human history. Germany's invasion of Poland. On 1st September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Despite their alliances, Britain and France were unable to come to Poland's aid. With a force of 52 divisions, Germany entered Poland with an infantry force of only 30 divisions and occupied this country with the fall of Warsaw on 27 September 1939. On 17 September 1939, Molotov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, summoned the Polish ambassador to his office and, with the note he gave, declared that the Polish state had ceased to exist and that all agreements of the Soviet Union with this country had been terminated. Hitler began preparations to re-attack the harbor of Danzig from Poland. He signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Then he declared war on Poland. Britain and France, who had previously made a treaty on how they would act against Poland, also entered the war against Germany. The Soviet Union applied to Estonia and demanded naval and air bases. Germany would not help Estonia, so Estonia had no choice but to accept. On 28 September 1939, Estonia signed a mutual aid treaty with Soviet Russia, agreeing to provide naval and air bases and to allow a Soviet force of 25,000 people into its country. The Soviets then signed mutual assistance pacts with Latvia on 5 October and Lithuania on 10 October, granting them the same rights they had obtained in Estonia. When it was Finland's turn, Finland asked for help from the USA and Germany, but their request for help remained inconclusive. On 30th November 1932, the Soviets attacked Finland. Although Finland resisted for 2 months, it was not successful. The surrender of France. While Germany continued its rapid advance, the French and British troops were relying on the Maginot Line they had created. However, the Maginot Line is thought to provide security to Germany at most. Although the French military forces were numerically superior, France failed because they could not use their military superiority and armored vehicles effectively. These military mistakes affected the internal developments of France for a long time. The Italian leader Mussolini, certain that Germany had won the war, declared war on Britain and France, declaring, "The clock has struck the hour of Italy's bright future." However, the Italians failed to achieve any success against the French. While France was occupied by the Germans, England and the USA did not provide any assistance. After securing its east and north by occupying Norway and Denmark, Germany turned westwards towards France. As a matter of fact, on the morning of 10th of May 1940, German armies started to attack the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Luxembourg was immediately occupied. The Netherlands and Belgium fought back. But on 15th May 1940, the Netherlands had to surrender, and on 28 May 1940, Belgium did the same. After these successes, the Germans, while encircling the British and French forces on the English Channel coast, started to march on Paris. Meanwhile, Italy, certain that Germany would prevail, declared war against France on 10th of June 1940 and joined the Second World War. As a result of these positive developments, Germany entered Paris on 14th June 1940. Let's look at the German attack on France and the occupation of Paris. It was a sad and difficult situation for France. When the Germans began their offensive on the Western Front in May-June 1940, French civilians began to flee. Despite the optimistic news in May 1940, the statements that the German advance would be resisted, and the official orders for the people to stay in their places, the civilians in the north of France took to the roads, packed their belongings in the bags they had in their hands, and fled southwards in wagons, automobiles, and horse-drawn carriages. By 10th June, Paris looked like an empty city. This led to a change of government in France, with Marshal Pétain assuming the presidency. On 22nd June 1940, the new government signed an armistice with the Germans in Compiègne. This armistice saw the French army disarmed and captured, with the entire west coast, north and east of France, left to German occupation. The new French government, which moved to Vichy, followed a pro-German policy. However, General de Gaulle, who was in London as a military attaché, declared that he did not recognize the French government and tried to establish a resistance force outside the homeland. In fact, de Gaulle would make great efforts for the liberation of France from German occupation. After taking France out of the war, Germany turned towards England. However, the Germans failed to gain air superiority in the British Islands despite their best efforts. With the arrival of winter, they abandoned the invasion of this country. After that, until the Normandy landings on the Western Front, air battles and the actions of the French resistance groups were effective. The war in England. After gaining superiority over France, Hitler turned to England. However, the fact that England is an island country affects the war strategies and conditions to be applied. It is thought that England can only be captured by invasion, and in order to realize this, it is necessary to land in England. This meant that England had to be bombed intensively. Germany first made a peace offer to England and stated that the two states could come to an agreement. However, this offer of Germany was rejected by saying that England will not submit to threats in force. When the peace proposals also failed, Germany bombed England starting from 13 August 1940. Both England and Germany suffered heavy losses during the war, but England won the war. Germany's expansion into Europe was unstoppable. Two undefeated states remained in Europe, Britain and Russia. Germany and Russia acted together, but Germany was uneasy about Russia's policy in the Balkans. The Soviets, who found themselves at war with their former ally with the German Operation Barbarossa, that started on 22 June 1941, fought with the Germans on the Eastern Front for 3 years. The Red Army and the Soviet civilian population suffered the most casualties in the war. Germany had to secure its right flank before attacking the Soviet Union, so it advanced towards the Balkans. In the Balkans, Germany captured Romania, Bulgaria, and then Yugoslavia. U.S. policy and entry into the war. The United States was compelled to enter World War II as a result of a struggle between the United States and Japan between 1937 and 1941. This began slowly at first, but intensified with the outbreak of war. Japan's invasion of China led to the violation of American interests in China. With the outbreak of World War II, relations between the United States and Japan began to deteriorate. Although they both stayed out of the war, and their paths diverged from each other, an environment of conflict arose between the two states. The event that made America most uneasy was Japan's signing of the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy on 27 September 1940. This alliance was directly directed against the USA. Its aim was to prevent the USA from being close to the UK. However, after this development, the UK and the USA adopted a closer policy towards each other. Following the enactment of the Lend-Lease Act, the US pursued a more moderate policy in order not to provoke Japan in the Far East and went to compromise. However, in the face of America's new policy, Japan adopted a harsher policy and demanded that America cut off its aid to China and Britain. Japan took advantage of this new American attitude by making an agreement with the Vichy government and obtaining the right to use 8 air bases and 2 naval bases in Indochina. In response, the USA froze all Japanese receivables and goods in the USA and controlled trade with Japan. On 7 December 1941, Japanese planes bombed the American bases in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and declared war on America. This marked the USA's entry into World War II. Arma Olu, 1999, pp. 194-195. Japan officially declared war against the USA and Britain on 8 December, and against Germany and Italy on 11 December. Many other countries also went to war with each other, as the war turned into a world war. Japan achieved great successes in the first moments of the war, occupying many regions in the Pacific and Indochina. However, the Allies stopped Japan's expansion in late 1942. On 12-13 November 1942, the United States inflicted the first major defeat on the Japanese Navy off the Solomon Islands. This event marked the beginning of the end for Japan in the Far East. Eastern Front Stalin was aware that the Germans were preparing to attack Russia as early as April 1941. However, he failed to take the necessary measures. The reason for this is that the war with England was still going on. Nevertheless, Germany launched a massive offensive on the Russian front with 160 divisions of infantry, 20 armored divisions, each containing 350 tanks, and 3,500 aircraft. The Russian military was as strong as the Germans but lacked the weapons and equipment to match them. This proved decisive in the German offensive, which started from Leningrad, Moscow, and Kiev. Kiev, Odessa, Rostov, and the whole Crimea fell into German hands. Despite moving to take Moscow, they failed due to the unfavorable climatic conditions. Hitler was determined to capture Stalingrad to defeat the Russians. Despite the Germans' best efforts, the city remained in Russian hands. As the Russians advanced, the Germans began to retreat. Stalingrad marked a turning point in World War II. Italy declared war against France on 10 June 1940 and joined the Second World War. This put Britain in a difficult situation. Italy held Libya, which had a strategic importance in North Africa. With its navy in the Mediterranean, it cut Britain's connection with its colonies to a great extent. The capture of North Africa, a strategically and economically important area, would have changed the course of the war. Italy, which was determined to seize North Africa, attacked Egypt on 13 September 1940 with an army of 200,000 men gathered in Libya. However, it was stopped after a short advance. After the British forces in Egypt were reinforced and strengthened, they launched a counterattack on 8 December 1940. In February 1941, it occupied Benghazi, and in April 1941, it took Eritrea and Abyssinia. Italy's failures led to Germany joining the North African Wars in March 1941. The German armies under the command of General Rommel were successful against the British and advanced until near Alexandria. However, from October 1942 onwards, the Axis powers began to decline due to the British counterattack. The Allies' victories in the battles fought with the Axis powers in North Africa led to their defeat and surrender in May 1943. The Allies thus gained success in the North African Wars and dominated the southern shores of the Mediterranean. The war ends. The Allied powers stopped German troops under the command of Field Marshal von Rommel in front of El Alamein. The British then launched a counterattack in October 1942 with troops under the command of Field Marshal Montgomery and defeated the German von Rommel. On 8 November 1942, American and British troops under the command of General Eisenhower landed in North Africa and captured this region. The Allies advanced towards the north of Italy and occupied the country on 10 July 1943. This was to open a southern front against the Axis powers. Italy had been a failure from the beginning of the war, and the occupation caused the people to feel discontent against the regime. The Grand Fascist Council, which convened on 24 July 1943, removed Mussolini from power. In 1944, the Allied powers achieved air superiority. They opened the Second Front by landing on the Normandy coast of France on 6 June 1944. Field Marshal Rommel, who defended the area, had hints about Germany's two-front war problem behind his prediction for the landing. He was certain that the first day of the landing on the beaches would determine the fate of the Third Reich. Rommel believed that the war was lost in the long term on the Eastern Front, but once the Western Front was opened, it would also be lost in the short term. However, things did not go as expected. On 9 August 1944, Paris was liberated from the German armies. General de Gaulle, the famous name of the French resistance movement, formed a government and brought life back to France. After the Allies entered Berlin, Hitler committed suicide on 30th April 1945 and was replaced by Admiral Dönitz. On 2 May 1945, the Allies captured Berlin, with the Soviets playing a significant role. On 4 May, the German armies in the Netherlands, Northeast Germany, and Denmark surrendered. On 7 May 1945, German delegates signed Germany's unconditional surrender document at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. The Allies stopped the Japanese expansion in the Pacific in 1942. In 1943 and 1944, they gained naval and air superiority. As of early 1945, the Allies launched attacks in China, Indonesia, and various places in the Pacific, which were under Japanese occupation. The Allied powers dealt the last blow to Japan in July-August 1945. On 9-10 July 1945, the United States bombed Tokyo, the capital of Japan, from the air. Japan's power was exhausted, yet it rejected the Allied proposal to surrender. The USA dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on 6 August 1945 and the second on Nagasaki on 9 August 1945. On 10 August 1945, Japan formally accepted defeat. The surrender document was signed on the U.S. warship Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay on 2 September 1945. With this event, the war in the Far East ended, and the Second World War, which cost the lives of approximately 40 million people, ended with the victory of the Allies. Turkey pursued a policy of balance to avoid entering World War II. However, it was affected by the events of every year of the war. It believed that maintaining good relations with both the Allied and Axis states was consistent with its non-war policy. To this end, it signed treaties with the British, French, Soviet Union, and Germany. Koch, 2018, 96. Sertel asserts that Turkey became one of the most important espionage centers of the world during the Second World War. British, German, American, and Russian agents attempted to gain advantage for their countries through various intrigues. While Turkey tolerated Allied activities, it took harsh measures against Axis activities. However, it was also extremely careful against Russian activities and carried out prevention activities. It even allowed the Germans to weaken the Russians by establishing a radio and supply base on the Russian border. Istanbul became an important center for all intelligence units. The eastern provinces attracted the attention of the great powers due to their proximity to Russia and Middle Eastern countries. The Aegean coast became a base for the British Special Operation Executive and American Office of Strategic Services, intelligence organizations for their maritime operations to the Axis-occupied Balkan countries. The MAH, National Security Service, established in 1926, monitored most of the espionage and sabotage activities carried out in Turkey's territory and territorial waters between 1939 and 1945. It is clear that Turkey took every precaution at every stage of the war to prevent the spread of conflict to its own country. During the Second World War, Turkey made the strategic decision to stay out of the war as long as it was not attacked. Despite this decision, Turkey signed an alliance treaty with Britain and France, two of the parties to the war, and undertook the obligation to join the war when the written conditions were fulfilled. Turkey tied its obligation to participate in the war to certain conditions. Despite the treaty it signed, Turkey took careful steps in both domestic and foreign policy to stay out of the war as long as it was not attacked. The League of Nations, which could not prevent World War II, was terminated after the war. The United Nations was established to ensure world peace. In order to prevent the negative consequences of World War II, reforms were initiated and industrialization accelerated. National liberation movements gained momentum in countries such as Indonesia and India, which were weakened during World War II. The territories of the states that lost the war were occupied, and Germany and Austria were divided into 4 occupation zones. The regions where the hot war was mainly fought were Europe, East Asia, and North Africa, respectively. Most of the countries in these regions were occupied, some of them more than once, or even if not occupied. They became direct military targets and fronts, leading to disasters. Therefore, the defeated countries, with the exception of the United States of America, emerged from the war exhausted and worn out. America and Russia emerged as the winners of the war. The world has now entered the Cold War period. We offer you deep historical information from history on YouTube channel. Subscribe. Now don't forget to turn on notifications.